So the Traction Gap Institute, the reason that we set this up from Wildcat was that one of the things that we wanted to be able to do as a firm was, as an early stage investor, was to be able to contribute back to the entrepreneurial community. Each of us as partners have been entrepreneurs. Each of us we've started companies, and we've seen those companies in many cases become multi-billion dollar outcomes. I was one of the first executives with Oracle when it was 40 or 50 people. Today, that's $185 billion worth of market cap, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people, but it was a small little company on Sand Hill. In fact, located in my former venture firm's current abode, where InterWest Partners is on 2710, which was a rather interesting, one of those interesting trivia elements. The purpose of this institute is to capture and publish the metrics that successful entrepreneurs have used to traverse this gap, this period in time that we're going to talk about in a few minutes, and to use these metrics to hopefully change some pretty dismal statistics that I'll share in just a second. So when you get together as a new company, or in this case as a new firm, one of the things that we looked at was, what are we really good at? What do we like to do? Where do we want to invest? And as we did that, we realized that when we took a look at industry data that suggested that, and I think this is actually being gracious, that only 3 out of 10 startups make it. I actually think it's probably about 1 out of 10, to be quite frank. But let's be gracious, that 90% fail. That's a pretty dismal statistic. It's why LPs have trouble investing in really early stage startups. It's why venture capitalists have trouble investing in early stage startups. But when we took a look at each of our own personal track records as investors within the Wildcat GP group, what we realized was that we had a better success rate. Roughly 7 out of 10 of our investments, or 70% of them, have been successful. And so we asked ourselves, well, why is that? There's a lot of great investors on, I'll use Sand Hill as the sort of the figurative word for venture capital, but there's a lot of very smart people, a lot of great firms, a lot of people have been very successful. So why is it that we're able to have this kind of success with the kind of companies that we've invested in at the same stage when others may not have been quite as successful? And what we realize is that among us, each of us have been former entrepreneurs, just like you. And we went through the same kind of trials and tribulations that you've gone through or that you're going through, and we learned a lot from those lessons. And while we didn't share the same vocabulary, but we realized that we shared a lot of the similar experiences. And as a team, as we got to talking, we began to formulate a strategy, a set of processes, and what has ultimately been shaped as a framework that we've labeled the Traction Gap. So what is this? Basically, there's 3 phases to a company. The first phase is our go-to-product phase. This is what Steve Blank and Eric Ries talk about all the time about lean startup. It's the go-to-product phase where you're trying to figure out product market fit, whether you've built the right features, whether the market is accepting those features, and whether they'll pay you for them. And Steve talks about getting outside the 4 walls, capturing market feedback, etc. And there's a lot of information and a lot of help here. There's accelerators and incubators, and I think you've probably, Y Combinator, AngelPad, et cetera. You've probably heard of all of them. And there's a lot of material you can study. You can go to Stanford or Harvard or Berkeley. You can take entrepreneurialism. You can read these books. There's a lot of angel investors who will work with you to help you. So that's kind of phase 1. Let's skip to phase 3. Phase 3 is things are working. The company is scaling. Now you're moving to Europe, you're moving to Asia Pacific, you have channels, you have a tiered organization, so multiple layers in your sales group, in your product organization, you have multiple product lines, et cetera. And then you've got to face that horrible chasm that Geoffrey Moore talks about and get through that. And there's a whole body of work on that after 25 or 30 years of Jeff's books helping us through that process to think about it and to work through it. There's consultants and a lot of people who can help you there. But when we looked as a group, the Wildcat group looked at where this 80%, 90% failure rate occurs, it's not in phase 1 and it's not in phase 3. It's in this phase 2 period, this missing link period, in this go-to-market area. And what we realize, there's not a lot of material here. It's basically myth and lore. You talk to your friends, you talk to other people who've been through it, and then you try stuff. You go and you realize that the stuff you're trying isn't working. And so that begins a big problem. And that big problem is that if you can't get through that gap period, you're not going to get financed. And if you don't get financed, it's very unlikely that you're going to survive. So we developed a framework. What's a framework? It's pretty simple. It's just a model with a set of processes associated with it, some terminology that allows us to have a reference point to talk about what happens during these phases. The model includes this go-to-product phase, reaching your initial product release or IPR, which is the first set of features, polishing the product, getting market feedback, till you reach a MVP, a minimum viable product market fit. Again, all vernacular that Steve Blank and Eric Ries have developed. And so we decided to build off of that same vernacular, just like you wouldn't go take a calculus class until you kind of went through trig and math analysis, et cetera. So at least you have some vocabulary about what those terms are. We didn't want to create some brand new terms and a brand new framework. So we're just building off of the great work that Steve and Eric have done. And we introduced 2 concepts: minimum viable repeatability and minimum viable traction. Minimum viable repeatability, or MVR, is really, I've delivered the product, we're getting feedback, and now I know when I go talk to somebody and I say these words and I do this demo and I have this kind of a contract, that 8% of that will convert into revenue. So I'm beginning to get a cadence for my company. I have multiple releases of my product. I know how to do it. I've been able to hire multiple people into the company. I can say the right words and convince them they should come on this journey with me. And that I've been able to repeatedly sell the product. So this period of time is a time when we begin to harden down what is a certification process for selling. We begin to tell the sales organization, this is the way that you need to sell it, the way that you need to talk about it, and it begins to work. From there, we move to MVT, which is minimum viable traction. This is a theoretical point in time at which all the venture capitalists are going to be throwing term sheets at you because you've demonstrated that you have viability, that people want to buy your product, that you're growing. And there's some very strong metrics around here that I won't be able to go into a lot tonight, but just to give you a sense for this, you get 2.5 years to get through from MVP to MVT. You've got to go from 0 in revenue if you're a SaaS B2B business to 6 million in annual recurring revenue or 500K of MRR. That informs a lot of things as you begin to build your operational plan to move from point A to point B through this gap, which says, well, how much capital do I need to raise in order to be able to make it to one of these, what we call value inflection points? The reason we say that is because you need to raise enough capital, but maybe not too much, in order to ensure you hit those points. Because if you don't, and you only make it partway through, the likelihood of you being able to raise at the maximum amount possible with the minimum amount of dilution becomes challenging, or if you can raise it all. So the key is to, just like you're engineering your product, you have to engineer your company. And you have to engineer it to be able to finance yourself to these value inflection points. When we raise money, Series Seed, A, B, C, and D, those are the ways that we talk about our companies. Those are terrible proxies for company maturity. I have a company that's a database company. We're on Series D. We're not an MVP. Why? It's a database company. It's 50, 60, $70 million. Does that mean that they're failing miserably? Maybe, but probably not. That's what it takes to build a database company. Now, if you're a mobile app company, that's probably a problem. So talking about a company as though it's Series Seed A, B, C, or D does nothing for all of us, for an LP, for a venture capitalist, or for an entrepreneur. These are the true value inflection points, and our challenge is to engineer our financial raises so that they line up with these value inflection points. If we can do that, if we can raise enough capital to go to from IPR to MVP, MVR to MVT, and we do it in across those 2.5 years, we can raise the most amount of money with the least amount of dilution. That's all this is. It's a financial exercise. One of the problems that a lot of companies face is you only raise money every now and then. We listen to these presentations all the time. And the trouble is that we have to be able to assess how likely is it for you to be able to traverse this gap in this amount of time. There's also one other element that you might want to record, and that is there's a Fibonacci type series that is part of the SaaS model. And it goes 1, 3, 10, 25, 50. And that Fibonacci series is what you need to be in terms of ending ARR at the end of year 1 from MVP. So let me say it again. From MVP, end of year 1, you need to be at 1 million ARR. Year 2, you need to be at 3. Year 3, you need to be at 10. Year 4, you need to be at 25. And at year 5, you need to be 50. Actually, it's 5.5 years, but just call it 5. Why? That's because 50 other public SaaS companies have laid the groundwork for this. That's what they did on average. So if that's what they did, that's what we have to do. It's what we as investors and you as entrepreneurs have to be able to do. So this becomes a way to engineer your financing, a way to build your operating plan. And there's a lot more to this, and there's a lot more metrics. You're going to hear more about this tonight. But what we are doing with the Traction Gap Institute is documenting all of this so you can traverse the traction gap in 2.5 years, raise the most amount of money possible with the least amount of dilution, and move into phase 3. That's the purpose of this. And to convert what has been myth and lore into just facts, metrics, strategies, and tactics. There's 4 architectural pillars that are associated with. These pillars exist from the time you form your company. There's a product pillar, there's a revenue pillar, there's a team pillar, and a system pillar. Why? Because those are the things that you need to worry about as you move across this traction gap continuum. As you move from left at an idea all the way through, those 4 pillars are in perpetuity until the company dissolves. But they get fleshed out. The team gets filled out. The product gets filled out, etc. So one of the things that we're doing is we are documenting at every one of those points if a company such as yours, has a similar business model, you might want to look at what others have done in order to be able to inform what you might do. You might want to take a look at what type of marketing strategy or what kind of sales strategy, et cetera, what kind of comp plans that people had, et cetera. So all this is a way of basically unpacking what has become myth and lore to get through this period of financial crisis so that way you can move on into phase 3.